13.5 years ago, Remedy Entertainment released a title that, over the years, became a cult classic. It's Alan Wake. It's the subject of this review. Anyway, it told the story of a troubled writer going to a small town with his wife, who then goes missing, where he finds he wrote a manuscript that is coming true and has to fight dark, shadowy forces. To this day though, that original game story still has people coming back and asking a variety of questions. It told a relatively simple story, but contained a lot of depth and hidden meanings, with memorable characters and mysteries to keep you hooked to the very end, and a cliffhanger that had people demanding answers they never really got. The gameplay was simple, but effective. You shone a light at the enemy, burnt away the darkness, and used your weapons to defeat them. Then it continued with Alan Wake's American Nightmare, and whilst it didn't have the greatest story to keep you going, what it did have was improved gameplay ideas, taking the action of the first game and making it feel a little faster than the original. Then we come to Alan Wake 2, which throws that gameplay style completely out the window in favour of slower paced combat. So instead of thrills and intensity, you would get a sense of dread and eeriness. From promotional material, it seemed to solidify that the story would be a worthy follow-up of the original game, including crazy characters and wild environmental storytelling. After more than 13 years of struggling to get the game off the ground, Remedy had their work cut out to make Alan Wake 2 a worthy successor. But did they? Well, initially I was going to have this review out pretty quickly after I completed the game, but I decided to wait a little bit as I allowed myself to digest what I just played. And after digesting, over the past week, I can safely say Alan Wake 2 is one of the best games of this year.
Crazy jumble like a nightmare.
Now, similar to my review in progress, there won't be any major story spoilers in this video, so you don't have to worry about that. However, as I am way past embargo, also, again, shout out to Epic Games for hooking me up with a review code, I will be showing clips from missions later in the game. However, none of it will show any major spoilers, just traversing some of the environments, as generally you'll be hiking back through some of the same type of environments anyway across the game. Let's start with the story, where you'll be progressing through two separate but related stories. You'll begin your journey as Saga Anderson, an FBI detective who arrives in Bright Falls with her partner Alex Casey, who veteran Alan Wake fans will know the name of. They arrive to investigate ritual murders performed by the Cult of the Tree, but the same day they arrive, they are informed of a new murder. As they investigate, they are sent down a dark path as they not only find manuscript pages that seemingly tell the future, including theirs, but encounter dark, shadowy people known as the Taken, which they need to fight with light. And that's all I can really say, because anything more than that, you'll be entering major story spoilers. But what I will say is that Saga's story at first started really slow, where there was, of course, a lot of setup, but little bits of action sprinkled in. However, the pace of the story didn't really pick up until around 4 or so hours in, and with someone like me who explores a lot in video games, it did feel like it dragged to start with. But what followed though was an intriguing and heroic journey that raised new questions as soon as you got some answers. And whilst not all my questions were answered, as Alan Wake once said,
"There's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear."
That much is definitely true when you inevitably begin Alan's side of the story, as you start in a television studio with no knowledge of how you got there. As Alan progresses, he realises he has to write again in order to escape the dark place he's been trapped in for numerous years, and from this finds himself in a dark, twisted and cruel wink, version of New York, where he's seemingly haunted by visions of Alex Casey. The thing with Alan's story is that there are far more questions raised than answers, which is what I love, because as you explore and put the pieces together, you begin to find double meanings for a lot of what he's learning. I'm sure for the average player though, someone who maybe isn't familiar with the Remedy connected universe, they may struggle to grasp at straws with all of this. But if you let yourself to be absorbed into this absolutely bizarre world, you'll appreciate what Remedy has built so much more. Across both campaigns, you'll encounter new and familiar characters from Remedy's past titles, all of which give stellar performances throughout, but it doesn't shoehorn every fan favourite character, which I'm sure for some will be a disappointment, but I feel it would be a hindrance to the horror story Remedy are telling if they had. Remedy wanted to make a chilling horror story, and all I can say is that they absolutely succeeded, especially when they use live action to sometimes transition from gameplay to cutscene, as it allows you to see the real emotion of characters on screen. There is a lot to be found in this world, with specific crossovers with Control as well as references to Remedy's other titles, and none of it overstays its welcome. Remedy are absolutely cooking with this rich world, and I never want anybody to stop them. So in the original Alan Wake, the gameplay loop went something like this. You'd progress through a dark area, a group of taken enemies would come and hunt you, you'd burn away their darkness with your flashlight, kill them, and repeat. It didn't do too much with its gameplay, and in some areas came across as quite repetitive, but it still allowed for some intense combat scenarios. Here in Alan Wake 2, that somewhat still stands, except you're not fighting hordes of Taken, or fade-outs as I believe they're called on Alan's side, where instead you'll maybe face off against 2 or 3 of them at any one time, and afterwards it may be a little while before you encounter more. At least to start with anyway. Combat is severely stripped back, as Remedy opted to be more atmospheric, where the game doesn't give you much indication of when the next combat encounter was coming, which in my eyes works in the game's favour. You'll need to be careful with your resources, as these can deplete quite quickly, since a lot of the enemies do require a beating in order to take them down. Fortunately, the game seems to have a dynamic resource system, where over time you'll find more locked boxes, which usually gives you just enough items to fight your enemies, as long as you don't squander them. Both Alan and Saga will have their own weapons to use in their campaigns, which, whilst being slightly different to shake up the gameplay, is also similar enough so you're not left trying to remember slightly different mechanics. I think where the gameplay falters just a little bit is when it comes to the upgrading. For Saga, you'll find charms which you can use to help give you a bit of an edge. Some of these charms are actually pretty useful, where one might give you a free revive when you lose all of your health, or even show you where various collectibles are, whilst others don't really feel like they have any effect at all. However, they're not really necessary anyway, and if anything, just seem like a nice little perk. But then there's the weapon upgrading on Saga's side and the words of power on Alan's side. For Saga, you'll find Alex Casey lunchboxes that provide you with manuscript fragments which you can use to upgrade the weapons you found. Now don't get me wrong, some of the upgrades are pretty useful, especially early on, like increased ammo in your guns, but most of them don't really give much of an edge over the enemies you fight, especially when they require specific scenarios in order for them to become useful. Then on Alan's side is the words of power. Across the environment you'll find spirals that allow you to upgrade a specific word only, which I can sort of understand why they did this, since there are some upgrades which can be really useful, and so if you are always able to pick and choose the more powerful words of power from the start, it may take away some of the challenge. However, similar to the weapon upgrades, whilst there are some powerful word upgrades, a lot of what you find doesn't really impact the gameplay too much. However, what I will appreciate from both of these mechanics is that they do incentivize exploration when trying to find what is required for upgrading, never knowing what cool thing you'll find around the corner next.
The Mind Place.
This place felt familiar. A ghost of a memory surfaced.
One of the major mechanics of both stories are the mind place and the writer's room. Again, starting with Saga, within her own mind, she can go to her mind place, a location that allows her to not only piece together her investigations on her case board, but also help with upgrading and looking back at past collectibles she's found. The case board will, however, be the main thing you'll be using, as you try to put the pieces together and solve various cases. Now at first, in my review in progress, I mentioned how it just kind of felt like a means to an end. But as I used it more and more, it began to grow on me as it also incentivized me to explore, giving me hints on where I might find the next puzzle piece. It was also nice to have a little board showcasing everything I've found so far when it came to things like the lunchboxes or even nursery rhymes, which, by the way, are sort of cool little riddles you'll need to solve to get a new charm. For Alan's side of the story, he has his writer's room, which is similar to the mind place but with less things to interact with, which was a shame, but not necessary. The main thing he'll be using though is his plot board, where in certain locations he can use story elements to change the environment. Some will progress the story, whilst others just show you a sort of what-if mini-scene. I really enjoyed this mechanic, as it made me want to go back to previous areas I had already visited to try out certain plot threads to see what happened, though I will say there are some which kind of went nowhere, which did let me down just a tad, but hey, it's optional content anyway. As well as using his plot board, Alan will also use his angel lamp, which allows him to pull light from one area and use it in another to change the environment. Sometimes it'll open an optional area, whilst others it's required to solve an environmental puzzle to progress. Again, I really enjoyed this, though I will say as I progressed through the story or even generally explored, Alan's campaign seemed to use it less and less, and I would have loved to have had more opportunities to experiment with it. One thing I absolutely want to praise, just like in the first Alan Wake game, is its music. The score helps to build the intense atmosphere Remedy was going for. But what I want to gush about more are the lyrical songs you'll find, most of which are played at the end of chapters, with the majority of them being specifically made for this game, each of which fit in perfectly with the mood as well as feeling like a beautiful conversation between characters.
Made a promise that I'm coming out alive. Raging heart went too far. I will never lose myself again, or I hear your tears at night as I hear the storm howling, losing my child, taken by the tide. Nowhere to hide, I don't know.
Also, if you enjoyed episode 4 in the first Alan Wake game with the stage fight, or even the ashtray maze in Control, then buckle up, because without saying anything more, you will be in for an absolute treat. The environments in this game as well, just incredible. There's so much density to them that it often feels like the world is closing in on you, which only heightens the atmosphere Remedy was trying to go for. It's incredible the amount of detail they've put in as well. However, whilst beautiful, environments did feel a little hazy at times, especially in the lighter areas, as I mentioned in my review in progress, having a sort of grainy effect to it. But mostly this was unnoticeable and didn't hinder my enjoyment. I also did encounter a few bugs in my playthrough, however it seems the majority of these have already been patched out, so just know your mileage may vary. I will say as well that whilst Remedy does nail most aspects of the survival horror genre, they did somewhat over-rely on jump scares, with clips of enemies basically screaming and screeching on the screen, which are only there to make you jump. In some chapters, there's a huge over-reliance on this to scare you. Once or twice, sure, go ahead. But not 8 or 9 times in half an hour. So what more can I say about Alan Wake 2? Was it worth the 13-year wait? Absolutely it was. Is it a perfect game? No. But if you take your time with it, you'll come to realise there's so much here. The world has been painstakingly crafted to suck you in, with mysteries around every corner for you to theorise about. Alan Wake is and has always been about creating conversations, and on that front Remedy has succeeded. It might not be the best on the combat side, but it doesn't need to. It just needs to be enjoyable enough to get you from A to B, which again, it does. My score for the game is a 9 out of 10. Alan Wake 2 is absolutely outstanding, and genuinely there's nothing quite like it. Remedy are storytelling geniuses, and I cannot wait to see where the Remedy connected universe goes next.